Hello and welcome to my channel. I go by the name Dark Mage. Today I'll be making a tutorial on micro interactions. What are micro interactions? These are single use subtle visual cues that draws your attention to a change in states. So these micro interactions or visual cues can be in form of hover effects like this, black and white. When I hover over this picture, it changes from black and white to colored. It can be in form of this, so extending and collapsing. It can also be in form of changing tabs from one tab to another. These are all subtle visual cues that make up micro interactions. It can also be in form of simple button changes, from the successful change to an error change, the Twitter buttons hover effect. These are some examples of micro interactions. Now, there are some things to keep in mind when you are working on these micro interactions. So you have to make them functional. Wherever you're going to put these interactions, make sure that they have a functional purpose. Don't just throw in micro interactions into your applications because they look cool to do. No, they have to have a functional purpose. If not, it becomes annoying to your users. Less is more. You might have come across this phrase in architecture, arts, cooking, even. So less is more. Keep it as simple as it can be. Anything beyond simplicity can damage your user's experience. Now, the next you talk about longevity is key. So it should survive long-term use. And with each long-term use, it should still be alluring each time a user comes to that particular interaction. So what this means is, will I still enjoy these effects on your application if I visited the 5th time, if I visited the 100th time, if I visited the 1000th time? Will I still enjoy the allure that comes with this micro interaction, or will it start becoming annoying? These are things you have to put in mind. Also, create visual harmony with other with other UI elements and their environments. So it has to match the general style of your application and also utilize the environment and should convey a holistic approach to smooth and seamless user experience. Also keep in mind to bring your data forward. When I say bring your data forward, it means that you should make important and actual data in this application more accessible and visible to your users. Another thing you have to put in mind is start with what you know. Now, here is where user experience research comes into play. What are the behaviors of your user or your intended user? How do they scroll through? What are the movements of their thumbs? How do they work out some interactions in your application? These should help you make informed decisions when you are making your interactions. Now, another thing you have to do is to use the overlooked applications or places in your application. So what this means is that button in your application, how do you make it more interactive? How do you add interactions to this? How do you create an allure with this button? Do you design and change the state? Do you add a little bit of animations to this button on hover or on a click? This is what it means by using the overlook. Another thing is to make your interactions human. It shouldn't look too robotic or computerized. If possible, add a little bit of feelings to it. Another thing is to experiment. You have to keep experimenting with these interactions on your applications. You experiment, you send to your user interacts with it, and then gives you feedback. This helps in improving the user experience of your application. Now we'll move to the main thing, which is button hover effects. So today we'll be working with 5 buttons. I'm working on hover effects with buttons. So we'll be creating 5 buttons. So the first button we'll be creating is the radius button. The next is the changing of colors of your buttons. So I'll create a new file, then go to the T, which is the text. I'll just put button here. Now this is too small to see, so I'll have to zoom in. Then I'll be using Enter for my font. I'll change my font size to 20. No, let's make it 16, so it will be the regular, and I'll be leaving it at regular. Then I've created a text called button. The next I'll do is to put an auto layout to this button by clicking on Shift button and A at once. Once I do that, you see auto layout added. It now has frame 1. I like renaming my frames as I work. Yeah, sometimes it's not plausible due to you trying to get things done, but it's good to name your frames. Now this is the first button we'll be going with. I'll have to duplicate this. I'll duplicate this into 5. So this is 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now these are the default buttons. These buttons here are the default buttons. Now for the first button, I'll be creating a radius button. I have my first button highlighted. The next thing I do is to add a fill here. When I add a fill, it overtakes including the text inside. So I'll select the text inside and put 1, 2, then hit enter. It changes it to 1, 2, 1, 2. This is a hex color. Then I'll select the whole of the frame and duplicate, Ctrl D. Now I have duplicated this. This is where I'll style my button or the next state I want it to be at. Then here, since we are doing a button, one thing I like doing for my buttons is when I come here, as you can see, horizontal and vertical padding. For the horizontal padding, if I'm going to have the vertical padding as 10, I'll do the horizontal padding 20. So the horizontal padding for my buttons are always twice the size of my vertical padding. So here it's now the way it's supposed to be. The next thing I'll do is to put a radius for this button. So let's see, start with 8. Okay, we could do 12. This is just at your discretion, depending on what you're trying to achieve. So 16. Let's say 20. Okay, looks nice. You could use 8, you could use 12, you could use 16, depending on what you intend to achieve. Let's go back to, let's use 16. Let's leave it at 16. Multiples of 8. So this is a 16 radius button. Then I want to change the color. The frame is highlighted. I'll clamp down on Shift key and click on this because I want the two fill to have the same color. So here is my hex. This is just an arbitrary color selection. So you could make yours any color you want it to be. Then for this selection, it's 1 to 1 2. That's for the right up inside. I want to make it white. So I put F and I hit enter and it turns to white. Now we'll have our first button. We'll go to our second button. So before I duplicate, I increase my horizontal padding, then Ctrl D to duplicate this button. This second button is going to both selected, will have a fill behind, and that fill, let's make it a green. So I'll go over here, then select this green. Then for this first button, this is the default button. So, but this one, we want to change the state from the default color into something else. So I want to make it a bit lighter than it is. As you can see, there is change in the hue of both of them. This is how I want this button to look when I hover over it. Then we'll come to our third button. I add a fill, then change the color of the fill to this blue. Then this should be okay. Then I double my horizontal button. Then Ctrl D is me duplicating my button. Now this button is going to be the outline button. I want when I hover over this button, I have just the outline and not with fill and everything. How do I achieve that? I add a stroke to it. Just click on stroke. As you can see, it has the black stroke around it, but I do not want it to be black. I want it to have this color of blue. Then I go to my color picker here and pick this color. I can also click on this color picker here and pick out my color from this. So it's dependent on how you want to make it happen. Then for my fill, I come here, the eyes are open or the eye is open. I can decide to close the eye. Now you see it now has an outline. Then I'll come in here into this button, then select my color picker and I pick this color so that it's going to be uniform. Now we have our outline button. Now the next button we're going to do is a text button. So looking at this without a fill, this is called a text button. It doesn't have a fill behind, so it's just open like this. This is called a text button. I want to change, when I hover on this changes from white to or red or whatever color I'm going to give this into another color. So I'll select this frame, come here, multiply my horizontal padding, Ctrl D to duplicate this button. Then here, my selection color, I'll come here. We'll use the colors that are already on here. So I'll be picking the red to make this. While I make this here, let me change it from white to blue. So we now have our button. When I hover on this, it changes from blue to this red here. The final button we'll be working on is this button here. So this button, I want when I hover on it, there should be a line, an underline underneath this. So as usual, we'll multiply this by 2, which is 20. Then I'll do Ctrl D to duplicate. Here is where another thing comes in. So I have to create my underline. I have to come here, then click on line, or you could do L to create your line. Then I'll draw my line. So the line is not that perfect. Let's make it a quarter line-ish. So here is the line. Here is the stroke. The color is 0, which is black. This stroke of line is okay. It looks okay. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'll be making it from 1 to 2. So to make it bigger. Now, I want this color. I'm changing this color to white to match this. How do I put this into this? I select this line, then move it into this. As you can see, the frame is highlighted and there is this tiny blue line by the left. When I leave this, this is where it puts the button. But we don't want our button to be side with the line. We want the line to be under the word button. So I select this bit frame here. Then come here. As you can see the auto layout, this makes your auto layout in the horizontal direction. I want this to be in the vertical direction. So I click on this. Now you see our button is below the line, but that is not what we want. We want our button to be above the line. So I select the button, move it upwards. Now let me click on the line itself. Okay, for some reason it's not wanting to change direction. So let me see from here. From here, I'll move this downwards. Okay, it worked. So if you try to move it from here and it doesn't work, try moving it from this left panel. Then, but we still see that our line, the button line, the space in between is too much. So I click on the button frame, then come here. This is the space in between items. Rather than have 10, I want it to be at 2, so that it will be closer to the word. Now we have our 2 buttons. Then I click on this because we want to use the colors on here. So I'll click on this and make this, let's go with the red. Then this one, let's go with the green, the bright green and not the default green and not the change green. So now we have our 5 buttons here. These are our 5 buttons here. So what next do I do to get what I want us to work with? Holding on to left clicking my mouse, I select all. Now everything is selected. I come up here for the components. Then I create a component set. Now we have our button component set with 10 variants. So it's telling you that it has 10 variants. Then the next thing I want to do is to create a frame that will be the platform for our prototype. Now I come here, click on this frame. So I'm going to be creating an arbitrary frame. It's not, we're not going to be doing the desktop, Mac, or whatever frame. It's just an arbitrary frame. You can resize this any way you want it. Now we now have our frame. The next thing I'm going to do is to go to this. You have the design, you have the prototype, and you have the inspect. For the purpose of this tutorial, to show you how micro interaction work, I'll be clicking on the prototype. Now we'll have our prototype selected. There is no device, background is 0, create a connection, and the rest of them. Now here I'll click on the button. As you can see, you see that there is an addition here. This is the node or the connector of your prototype. So when you're prototyping, this will add as the connector to whatever item you want it to change to. So in our case, or connect to. So in our case, we want to change the states. So here I connect this. As I've connected it, it says on click. Now here is the interaction details. On click, on drag, while hovering, while pressing, all these have different usage. With time in all the tutorials ahead, we'll learn how to make use of these options. For this, once when we hover on our buttons, the state changes. We'll go to while hovering. Now, we don't need to do anything here. Property 1, we don't need to do anything here. We don't need to do anything here. Then animation. As you can see, it's showing you what everything going to look like. So instant is going to change instantly. But we want to make it have like a smooth transition. We don't just want an instant transition. I normally use Smart Animate. So you can ease it in. As you can see, this is what it looks like. You could ease it out, ease in. This is how it eases in. This is how it eases out. So I use ease out. Now 300 milliseconds is just going to make it change like immediately. But we want to make it smooth and a little bit of time delay here. So I'll be using 800 milliseconds for our time delay. Now we have our first interaction. Then we'll do the same for every other button here. So connect, change from on click to while hovering. Smart Animate, we don't need to do anything here because we've already set what we want it to be. Then back to this other button, connect, while hovering, and we have this, no changes here. Then button, this, change this to while hovering, nothing else to be changed here, and change this to while hovering. And now we have all buttons connected to the change of states that we want it to be on. The next thing we're going to do is to highlight. For this, I'm highlighting this, Ctrl C to copy. Then I'm going to paste this here. This is where we'll be the frame that we'll be using for our prototype. Then Ctrl C, you copy all the buttons here. I think I have to increase this a bit. So Ctrl C, paste here. Ctrl C, paste here. The final one, Ctrl C, then you paste here. You can do Ctrl C, Ctrl V. Well, I'm just showing you how this works. Then we're done. This is all we need. The default buttons are all we need. We don't need this one in this frame. We've already created components out of it. So I'll click up here to select that frame. Then I'll click on this play button here, which shows you to present. And Figma opens up the prototype view. Now our prototype view is open. As you can see, these are the buttons, so it's not actually doing anything. You'll be like, where is our prototype, or where is our micro interaction? Here is where your micro interaction comes into play. When I hover over this, you see, it changes. So from a square edge to a rectangular edge. Now for our green button, we are not looking at the edge now. We are looking at the change in color or gradient of color. Now you see when I hover over it, it changes. Just hover over it and it changes. Then the blue button is our outline. When I hover over it, it changes from a solid button to an outline button. Then the next, see, hover over this, it changes the color. Then hover over this, see. So these are how to create hover animations or hover micro interactions on your buttons. So like, share with friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time on micro interactions. Bye bye.